Welcome back to the podcast. My name is Joseph Clough, and this is episode 820. And today we're doing something a little bit different from usual in a way that we're kind of just considering convenient mindsets that if you apply today will cause you to be able to have more freedom in your life, to be the person that you really want to do. Now, in my opinion, I've been thinking about, or like they're not mine, but I've been assuming these mindsets for many, many years. In fact, when I first became a practitioner almost 23 years ago, this is when I first began to learn about them. And these convenient assumptions, right? They're not truth. It is not a fact. These are just convenient assumptions that if you were to apply, would most likely allow you to live a better life in all areas, okay? So when it comes to money, when it comes to health, when it comes to abundance, when it comes to relationships, when it comes to your career, interacting with people, it's a real good game changer if you do start to apply this level of transformation because you start to assume them. So let's just go through a few of these in no particular order. But the first one that I really love is something which I think we do not have as much in this present day, whether it be because of social media, whether it be because everything's so political these days. You don't know if you're right or you're wrong, you don't want to upset people, or there's all these arguments. Well, the first one is to have respect for the other person's model of the world. Well, what is a model of the world? Well, it's ultimately your perception. Your perception of your reality, right? That's a model of the world. You have a different model of world from me. You do. We've had different experiences, so we've come to different conclusions of what we think of life, what we think about politics once again, what we think of social media, what we think of whether it be like religion or whether it be just about career, relationships, once again, all of these things. We have a model of the world. So notice that I said respect the other person's model of the world. And I didn't say to agree. And that's what I think we've had a big problem with. Like, we're all in these mindsets of us against them. But look, we just come from different places. We come from different places. So it's important to respect their world, but not necessarily agree. And when you do that, you begin to understand where they are maybe coming from, rather than making judgments of a person, rather than making judgments immediately based on their statement or their belief system. And once again, it could be if you're in a conversation with someone, when it comes to, say, an argument, or it could be just about anything, people you don't know. If you begin to understand that they come from a model of the world, that's caused them to come up with certain ideas about life, about anything, but we start to just dismiss it, that's where we're going to get tension. So when you begin to respect it and not necessarily take it on and make it your reality, like, in fact, throughout all the 800 plus episodes, I don't want you to just go, well, that's truth, that's truth, that's truth, because it's just my experience. I would like you to respect it, but you don't have to agree with it. So if I'm thinking about having conversations with people where we have totally different belief systems, I want to honor at least their model of the world if that's their perception. You see, the more I understand about their model of the world, the more I can begin to bridge the gap. The more I can start to communicate differently. It almost comes back to intention, which we'll be going a little bit deeper into soon. So I'm not going to go right into it on this one. But if you understand their intentions by understanding their model of the world or their model of their reality, their filter, you will start to then begin to meet them. And that kind of goes into the map of the world because Alfred Korbisky, and we talked actually about this, I think on one of the episodes a few weeks back, or at least, because this is, by the way, for those listening to the app or the podcast and all those things, this is being broadcasted live on YouTube. And I think it was maybe one of the after streams. And I was saying about Alfred Korbisky, and he kind of termed the map is not the territory. You see, What does that mean to you? If I just say the map is not the territory, what does it mean to you? Because it's hard to understand. But if we take it in the context of the map of the world, your map of the world is not everything. There's so much more to explore. There's so much territory out there that if you begin to recognize, actually, there's more for me to discover, more for me to learn, more for me to consider, it will allow us to start to go beyond our present map. But a lot of the time, we just operate from this fixed place. But I'm not good enough, I'm not worthy, I'm not deserving, and that means I cannot achieve X, Y, Z. It means I can't do and achieve this goal, or because of my past, it equals this present situation which I don't like. Well, that's just the past. Yes, we may have come to conclusions, but there's so much more to explore. There's so much more territory out there to think differently. You see, your beliefs will start to cause you to generalize aspects of the world, right? If I go, I'm not good enough, and that just means all future opportunities I cannot go for. Like, I'm not good enough for it. I'm not good enough to get a relationship. Or if I've had one bad relationship, that must mean all future ones. So that map of the world is so generalized, or we could say distorted or deleted because of that experience that we've had, that it formulates this map of what we think is true, our perception. But in reality, the objective reality, beyond this subjective conclusion of reality, there's so much more to explore. Now, why is that convenient to have? Well, it means that you're always going to start to learn. You're going to always recognize that actually this judgment or belief that you have about yourself, which may be a limiting belief or a trait that you dislike, is actually just your present map. It doesn't have to stay this way for the rest of your life. It doesn't have to be fixed in place. It doesn't mean that you have to be, I'm not good enough, worthy, deserving for the rest of your life. There's so much more to explore, and that's why I do what I do. I try to come up with different reframes or different learnings or insights based on my life to hopefully impart and help many, many people. That's what I just love doing. So if I start to come up with questions or ideas, it will cause you to challenge your own map of the world. So I really, really would love you to take that on, in a sense that your present map of the world is not true. It may be your present truth in terms of your present conclusion, but if you stay that mindset, you're always going to be locked in. And that's going to cause you to never go beyond your boundaries, beyond your present map. So recognize that the map is not the territory. The map of your world isn't the only thing. There's so much more to explore. Now, the other convenient mindset that I like to bring into this is that we all have the resources that we need. Even if we don't have them all now, we can learn them. We can create them. It is all about learning. It is all about adapting. When I wrote my book, Be Your Potential, the tagline was like you got everything you need ultimately within you. You got all the resources there. They may not be fully present where you want them, but recognize that you are full of potentiality. You are potential. And that if you are potential and you have the will and the desire, you will have the resources needed to get there. But yes, you've got to assume responsibility. Yes, you've got to take action. I mean, they're good presuppositions to have as well, right? To presuppose, to take good, inspired action, to be able to assume responsibility. But if we begin to find the inner resources of us, it almost goes into another mindset, which is the law of requisite variety. The person or the system with the most adaptability and the most flexibility controls the situation. Now, you being here today means that must be true, because you've adapted through traumas, you've adapted through your environment to still be here. So we should have gratitude that you are a survivor and a thriver of adaptability. And if we go into the bigger picture of things, if we think of as a whole world, not everyone has survived, and not every species is still around that ever began or have been in the wild. They weren't able to adapt to their environment. But if we think about it, well, if I can have more flexibility, if I can start to develop adaptability, resiliency, resistance, it will allow me to go through many different scenarios, many situations. And that's something what I try to build into my character. I honestly try to do that. So I try to push myself to become more resilient, more adaptable. And it's something that I try to think about a lot. Like, how can I be more adaptable today? How can I be more flexible in this situation? Because if I get locked in and go once again, well, my environment is showing all this pain and trauma, that the economy is just terrible right now. And that must mean I can't get a job. Or if I've had all these bad relationships, it must mean I'm never going to get a good one. It's not going to serve you. But if you start to be adaptable, and it almost goes into what Einstein said, is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting different results is a definition of madness. Because that's not being adaptable. That's not being flexible to the situation. If you are going to thrive, have the mindset in your mind that you are going to be adaptable today, that you're going to start to seek the resources. I always say, you don't have to necessarily have all the resources now, but you have to have the resourcefulness to start to get them. Because you can start to be in a resourceful state of mind when you have the willingness to adapt, the willingness to grow as a person, and to allow ourselves to really get what we want. I really mean that. If you are more adaptable, you will become more resilient. And know that you are the definition of it, because you are alive today. And that means you've got what it takes to become even more adaptable, to be even more flexible. Now, the other thing, which I really wish, this is going to push some buttons, and it's something that I've got to work on myself quite a lot. And that is the meaning of your communication. You ready for it? The meaning of your communication is the response that you get. Think about that in conversations. If you are getting a response from someone that is not to your liking, that they're not understanding you, they're not getting your point of view, it is up to us to be flexible and adaptable to say things differently. Usually we go, well, you're wrong, or this is wrong. Why don't you understand me? Well, if you're in an argument or a conflict or in a conversation and it's not going the way that you want, it is up to you. That's why it pushes up against your boundaries, to start to be adaptable in your communication. So the responses that you get from someone is the meaning, and if you don't quite get the word meaning, it's the quality of what you're communicating. So it's up to you to start to communicate in a different way, to have a different level of quality. And then you do that, you will start to get a different response from people. And it allows us, and there's why it's convenient, it allows you to go into conversations without blame, without dislike, without the resistance, and it gives you total ownership of your communication styles. I've been in relationships in the past and the communication is off. Well, if I want to change it, I've got to assume responsibility that what's coming back to me is up to me to start to then feed in a different level. The other one is, I know we're just going through these genuinely, is that there is no failure and only feedback. No such thing as failure, only feedback. If you think of having that as a convenient assumption, you are going to be destined to win. If you just see every so-called failure as feedback to your experience to start to, once again, you'll notice there's a theme of adaptability here, you will start to change the results that you get. For example, it's a numbers game. If you take in the context of sales, and if you're a salesperson, you will know this. Good salespeople will just not mind about the no and get to the yes. They will know it is either yes or no. If they just get stuck on the no, they're paralyzed. They can't do it. So they realize that every no they get is closer to the yes. That is about adapting. That is about learning from that situation to work with the next person. And if you think of if all the successes that you see, throughout your life, whether it be in like movies or in entertainment or just in your life, they didn't just happen like that. They so-called failed many, many times. They may have been just putting in the work in the background, learning and adapting, and that causes them to grow even more. So you should be a part, I'm not saying should, you don't have to, of course, but you want to be able to go, I'm willing to be adaptable. I'm willing to be able to see a different level of communication. I'm willing to be able to have that resiliency. And I'm also going to notice that there is no failure, because that means I can only grow. If I can only grow, I can only transform. Right? Now, the other thing is, when it comes to communication and other people, is people are not their behaviors. And it's important for communication, but it's also important for you. You see, most of the time, we think of anxiety, we think of fear, we think of worry, we think of the imposter syndrome, we think of not being good enough, worthy, deserving, the fear of rejection, the fear of failure, the fear of success. We think that is who we are as a way of being in this world. We think that is our identity. You see, you go throughout life, you go through those experiences, that map of the world, and it comes to a conclusion. And usually we come to a conclusion about two things, either the world itself or our identity, right? So I went through all these situations. That must mean I am not good enough, or I am not worthy, or I am not deserving. And those situations can be told at school. It could be bad relationships. It could be a poor upbringing, maybe perfectionism, because we always had to be perfect. And we start to internalize it as our identity. But the truth of the matter is, that is a behavior. It is not who you are, right? So people are not their behaviors. And I would like you to go a step deeper into it and recognize the behaviors that you dislike, even when it comes to the behavior of not being good enough. I know it's an identity statement, I know it's a belief, but if we break it down into a structure, it's still a strategy, which then means it's a form of a behavior that we're operating. Think of the intention behind it. What is the intention of not believing we're good enough? What is the intention behind not feeling worthy? What is the intention by not feeling deserving? What's the intention of needing to be perfect? What's the intention of the fear of being found out? Well, it's going to be protection, right? It's going to be a mechanism of protection and safety. Even the behaviors we dislike. So if people go to drugs or alcohol, well, why do they do that? Well, it could be a form of escapism. It's not who they are. An alcoholic is not their identity, or a drug user. There's an intention behind as to why they do it. And it also allows us to go into in conversations and understand that. So if you have a problem with someone, remember, there's an intention behind their words. That behavior that is presented is not the real problem. It's just what's happening. The real truth is, if we start to honor the intention, don't have to agree, once again, we can respect, but that's their intention. If you start to see people via intentions, you will change the way you see every conversation you're going to be having, even the behaviors you absolutely dislike in people. For example, if people are, say, bullies, and I say that just because it's an easy one to go, oh, well, that makes sense. And if people are bullies, they've usually had some form of bullying, right? And it causes them to get that way. Is it an identity? Is that who they are? No. There's intention behind it. Maybe they weren't taught the skills. Maybe they were bullied, all those things. So when you think about other people's behaviors, go back to their intention. When you think about your own behaviors that you absolutely dislike, from the identity, from our capacity, from our behavior, from what shows up in our environment, what is the intention behind why you do what you do? Now, the good presupposition behind that, or the meaning behind it, is it causes you to be in less resistance with your unconscious mind. So, for example, if you go, I hate not being good enough. I hate blushing. I hate that I'm self-conscious. I hate that I have the imposter syndrome. Now, although we may hate the behavior, the nature of having that hate, who are we directing that hate to? Ourself, our unconscious mind, which is running it. But as soon as you start to look through the dislike of the behavior that we're running and understand the intention, guess what happens? The unconscious mind starts to listen. It starts to go, well, now you get me. I'm doing this to protect you. And that means we're not in resistance. We're not in conflict anymore. We're starting to come back as one. So remember that people, including you are not your behaviors. There's always positive intentions behind it. Now, the other one is that you're in charge of your mind and therefore your results. To me, that's total ownership. I know we've been through many things, and I'm not letting other people off the hook. If we've been hurt, used, abused, whether it be physically, mentally, sexually, I'm not saying it lets them off the hook. What I'm saying is, if we give our power away to them, that's not very good at all. We've got to assume responsibility for what we do in this moment and use it as leverage at the very least if you need to. But you are in charge of your mind and therefore your results. Otherwise, we're pushing blame on everything else, whether it be the economy, whether it be our employer or our boss or the relationship that we're in or our past or people who passed away. We still may have a lot of stuff going on there. If we do that, we're just pushing it on them, or we're pushing it beyond ourselves at the very least, because it can be things like the economy. But if we start to assume responsibility, we're no longer on the effect side of life. We're no longer a product of life. In fact, as I always say, rather being a product of life, allow life to be a product of what you choose to create. And that comes from the absolute assumption of responsibility. I think when we start to live that way in terms of the adaptability, having respect for other people's model of the world, realizing your present map of the world is not everything, that's not who you are, there's so much more to learn and explore. And if you don't think that's true, well, you're here. You could be doing many other things right now, but you set the time out to grow your mind. Whether you agree or not with what I'm saying, you're still invested in learning and adapting. We've been that way ever since we were young. Always learning, always growing. There's always more to explore. So recognize that your map of the world is not everything, or there's so much more beyond your map of the world. To know that your mind and body is also interlinked. Right? Vice versa, body has an effect on the mind. And if you don't believe me, I think it's a few episodes back, I did an experiment with you, an exercise that made people go beyond what they thought was possible when it comes to their physical limits, just by doing something in the mind. So when you start to work on your mind, you're starting to work on the body. When you're starting to work on the body, you're starting to work on the mind. Like for me personally, running is as a form of therapy for me. It is so biologically good for you, in my opinion. Whether it be a walk as well for people or run. But exercise in general, you have to look after your body. Just don't listen to hypnosis. You move your body at the same time, and that's going to be doubling your mental health by doing so. Know that there's no such thing as failure and only feedback. You can't lose when you do that. The people are not their behaviors. There's intentions even behind what you do. And that means we actually connect with either people or we connect with our unconscious mind that bit more. And the big one was as well that the meaning of communication is the response that you get. If you're not getting the right response, then you need to start to assume responsibility in changing how you communicate. And let's add to that one actually. And that's this. People are present using all that they have right in this moment, right? If they could choose differently, they would. For example, if someone is hooked on drugs, if they could choose differently, they probably would. For those who have limiting beliefs and not being good enough, if you could choose differently, you probably would. So when you start to see people, and there's why I apply this, because I work with lots and lots of people over the last 23 years, is that I know they're not choosing to act that way consciously. They're doing it because maybe it could have been way back in the past that it caused a certain belief and a certain set of feelings and behaviors which has led to this point right now. So if we think about their intentions, we think about their resources, they're trying to do the best that they can. That's my convenient assumption. I mean, like I said, it's not mine as such, but it's one that I choose to assume because it allows me to see people differently. You see, everyone was a baby once, right? And if everyone was a baby once, then we all started very much in the same kind of place. We can have different environments, of course, but if you've got conflicts with people, just for a moment, just see them that they were once a little child. They were once a baby. They have gone through certain things which may have led them to come to the conclusion or that behavior. So when you start to see them that way, it kind of just takes the pressure off. You start to see the world differently. So ultimately, they're just a few convenient assumptions. It comes from a lot of NLP. There's far more than that, of course, as well. But I like to think when I'm working with people, I'm trying to look for their intention behind why they do what they do. If I'm not getting the answers back that I want, I need to change my communication. I need to take assumption of my responsibility for my life. I've got to have respect for other people's model of the world and have to agree with it. But if I want to be able to enter a conversation, it's going to allow me to be able to enter it by doing so. I know that there's so much more to explore, that this present map of my mind is nowhere near done. There's so much more of the world to discover on the inner world. So I'm not going to get locked down into, well, this is all there is, because there's so much more. So ultimately, that pretty much concludes the end of this episode. I know it's been a little bit jumbled because there's so many angles we could approach it, but I believe if you do start to assume even just one or two, just focus on one or two. Focus on intentions one day. What are people's intentions? And you can go from lots of different situations. People in the media, people you dislike, what is their intentions? How do they come to that? What's the meaning of their communication, even if not communicating it in the way that you'd like? It just changes your relationship with yourself, with the world, and everyone else. So with that, my friends, I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I look forward to speaking to you in a future one. Many thanks, and goodbye.